Hello and welcome. Today we're discussing spacing, specifically with Zenyatta, Winston, Tracer, and McCree. As I continue to do VOD reviews, I realize how much people struggle with their positioning. So I thought I would take one aspect of positioning and really focus on that being spacing. So you can see here, I visually represented the battlefield and flattened it into a 2D space. Obviously, Overwatch is a 3D game, but I think this is the best way to showcase the points we'll be talking about today. Okay, so 0 meters, you can think of that as the center of a fight. So 0 meters to 50 meters is your side, and 0 to the negative side is your opponent's side, just roughly speaking. Okay, and on that note, everything we'll be talking about today will be in generalities, right? So based on the VODs that I've seen and where I think people struggle and where their weak points are in terms of positioning, I'm giving this advice based off that. So again, generalities. These are guidelines. They're meant to be broken and bent as you climb up and understand the game better. But this should serve as a decent foundation, a base to start at, which you can then build upon. So please don't chew my head off if there's little details here and there that you're like, oh well, if this situation you could do this. Well, yes, of course. So just generalities. Okay, great. So for Zenyatta, let's focus on this green bar, this 30 meters to 40 meters. This is where I basically want Zenyatta to start his fights. Again, this is where he should start. 40 meters is maximum range of Discord and Harmony. And obviously at this range, your accuracy will go down, but you will get much more in return. So let's talk about what that is. First off, you'll have a really good vantage point, and that's going to allow you to make better decisions about when to go forward or when to fall backward. So basically into this teal range and back into this magenta range. So let's talk about when to go into this teal range. So there's basically two main cases. The first is, let's say you got a pick, or maybe your teammates got a pick. Let's say you got one or two. Awesome. Follow up on those picks. If your team wants to clean up those kills, you follow with them, you get aggressive. Awesome. So, that's an obvious case. The second case, not so obvious. The second one is when the fight's starting to devolve. So let's say it's like a 4v4 or 3v3 or a 4v3, a 3v4, etc., etc. The fight's getting dirty. You need to get in there. You need to abandon your green space and get really close. That way your accuracy goes up, right? You're more likely to hit shots, easier to have line of sight for discords and harmonies, etc., etc. Cool. Most Zenyatas don't have this problem dealing with the green and teal space. Usually Zenyatas will either start in the green space and then move to the teal space like all the time. And we'll talk about why that's not so great in a moment. The worst situation is when Zenyatas live in this teal space like all the time. And I have seen that. Zenyatas who refuse to play far back and kind of play closer to their team. And that's very dangerous. Basically, you're just kind of clumping up with your team. And that kind of brings us to this magenta side. So basically, when you start fights in this green range at really far distance, this 30 meters to 40 meters, like we talked about earlier, you're going to have really good vantage points, right? You're going to see Tracers, Genjis, and Winstons coming from a mile away. And again, there's certain maps where you can't do this, or at least not as well. So again, generalities. So what this is going to allow you to do is when you do see those Winstons and Genjis and Tracers, when you sense that they're coming, when you can see them, you tag them with Discord and you fall back. Instead, what I see far too often is Zenyatas clump up and go in with their team and go into like this teal space, and that's basically what the flankers want. They want you in a ball, right? Easier gravitons, easier pulse bombs, etc., etc., etc. That being said, there of course are times where you want to go into your team, get help from like a friendly Lucio or a Zarya, whatever, of course. But I see this magenta space far underutilized, and the goal of this space is when those Genjis, Winstons, Tracers, whatever, Divas, they are coming at you, you're trying to stretch them out. You're trying to basically sandwich them in between you and your teammates. You want to make sure you're wasting as much of their time, as much of their health, as much of their cooldowns. Basically, you're trying to just be like a resource hog where they're trying to send, and especially if they're sending more than one person at you, that's great. You can make them really fight and work to kill you. And as Zenyatta, that is an excellent thing to do. And as you get better, maybe you'll bring one of those down with you, one of those players. And if they're just sending one person at you, at this far range, Zenyatta is so deadly. He has shields, which can regenerate. So like if you're at a far distance, you can play with corners. He can regenerate. Ever since Blizzard removed the spread on his right click is insanely deadly. Not to mention Discord gives you wall hacks, right? So for 3 seconds, which is amazing. So I want Zenyatta's to get more comfortable, especially in solo queue, backing off. And again, sandwiching any flankers and divers between you and your teammates. It will be awesome. Trust me. It's one of those things where you can practice, and then as time goes on, you'll recognize, okay, do I go forward into this teal space or backwards into this magenta space? So please practice that using that magenta space. Okay, let's move on to Winston. Okay, Winston. When you start a fight, you want to be in this green bar area, this like 0 to 8 meters. This is a really good place for Winston to start his fights. Far too often, I'll see Winston's, stay like back at like 15, 20 meters and then jump in from there. Again, there are times to do that, but in general, if you can start a fight really close to your opponents, like around a corner, and that's the key, right? Is like with line of sight, using environment. If you can use walls, pillars, trucks, etc. To block line of sight from your opponents while keeping line of sight open from your back line and healers, you're going to be in a great space. So, and you're also going to be still creating space for your team, right? Also, what that's going to allow you to do is to use your jump pack defensively. Far too often, I see Winston's use their jump pack like purely offensively. When you start a fight like this, you can kind of dance around like the walls we talked about, and Tesla cannon. And then use your bubble, and if things go south, you can bail, or if things are going well, you can jump into this teal space, right, and just get down and dirty. So the key to using this green space, or excuse me, to starting a fight in this green space is to use your environment. So whenever you can, look for walls, look for corners that you can use. If they're in a given situation, if there isn't that, okay, fine, then you can just proceed normally, but like how you normally would, where you just maybe you dive in from, far away. There will be times where you have to do that. But I want Winston's to be able to recognize opportunities where they can start the fight in that safe space around a corner, really close to their opponents. And, sometimes maybe you'll use a jump pack to get into that spot, right? A good example might be like Night Market, Lijiang Tower, where there's like that courtyard in front of the point that you can kind of jump into. That's a pretty legit strategy to open up as Winston. Okay, teal space. Not a whole lot to say here. Winston's generally know how to dive and create a ruckus. So like in this teal space, this -20 to 10 meter range, just have at it. There's not a whole lot to say here. It's pretty. I guess I'll say basic. It's basically how you normally fight. Let's talk about this magenta space because it's far more interesting. A lot of times I'll see Winstons where, let's say it's like a Winston v Winston situation, and then the enemy Winston jumps at you. And then you're like, okay, well, he dove my team. I'm going to dive their team. When that happens, you generally want to help out your team and collapse on that Winston. So this magenta space is like the collapsing space where I want Winstons to practice turning their camera around every so often, especially in solo queue where comms aren't so great. And, checking up on your backline, see how they're positioned, what paths are open for them to get flanked, and, see if you can help them out every once in a while. Or rather, just check up on them. And decide if you can go help and collapse on them. And again, if you're in this green space, you can jump to either way. Like you're still open to go in either direction. And as Winston, that's very easy to do. So my point here is don't be afraid to every so often turn around, check on your teammates, and make sure that there's nobody diving them, flankers on them that you can easily punish. Because a lot of times in solo queue, flankers will get way too aggressive and be out of position. And as Winston, with that extra little bit of damage from your jump pack and your left click, you can clean up a Tracer, a Genji. Excuse me, sorry about that. Etc. etc. Okay, let's move on to Tracer. Tracer's pretty straightforward. That being said, she's probably the character I see the most that's played like quote unquote incorrectly. It's far too often that I see Tracers live on like the 0 to 15 meter side on her side. I want Tracers in general, like my advice is to get deeper behind enemy lines, to get, behind her opponents, -20, 30, 40 and beyond, right? Like a good example is Eichenwald point A on offense. When my team's struggling there at the choke, they're doing that choke dance. I'm just like, nah, I'm not going to have any of this. So I'll switch to Tracer. I will, get deep either left or right, depending on their defense, and just get way in there, use all my cooldowns, and then get health packs, wait for my cooldowns to come back, and then come back and contest the point. And then once I've done that, a ton of pressure gets alleviated from the choke because teams will typically send 2 or more people to come deal with me. I'm not necessarily looking for kills. I'm just looking to, influence my opponent's movements, right? I'm trying to get them to come to me and dance with them. So The point of this is I want tracers to get used to living, like the world's your oyster as tracer. You can live wherever you want. So maybe like 50, 60% of the time, maybe more, depending on how your opponents are playing, don't be afraid to, wreak havoc and be behind your opponents and really mess with them. Again, not necessarily for kills, just to, cause pressure, or to create pressure rather. So as tracer, you can go wherever you want. But again, my advice in general is for people to kick up the aggression and to get behind your opponents. Far too often I see tracers only starting fights on like their side, right? You want to be starting fights ideally roughly half the time or more on your opponent's side. That's going to take practice, but trust me, it will be worth it. That's a huge one. All right, cool. McCree. So McCree has like a pretty tight space he can work in, right? His fall off starts at 22 for his left click, starts at 18 for his right click. He kind of works well in this space. He's pretty straightforward. So you want to start roughly 20 meters, right? Like generally around there, and then kind of move forward and back depending on what's happening. Far too often I'll see McCree's like just go forward too much. Maybe because they don't trust their aim. Maybe it's because they're putting too much stock into how much the fall damage actually is. Like it's actually not too bad, like in the mid 20s to like 30. So generally stay in this green area, and then just move forward and back just a little bit, back to help flankers. As a side note, like if a Winston is diving your Ana or Zen, feel free to put in a fan the hammer, and then maybe a combat roll and another fan the hammer. That'll leave it with only 60 health. So or depending on the situation, maybe it's just one fan the hammer, combat roll, and then some left clicks or something, depending on how much your teammates are helping you. But that's something I don't see McCree's use enough, is fan the hammer on Winston bubbles. Anyways, yeah. So ideally, in an ideal world, McCree's in this 20-meter range. And your Ana and Zen is maybe 10 meters behind you, maybe 15. So you can, again, similar to Winston, turn around, make sure you can help your Anas and Zens with any flankers, divers, etc., etc. Let's talk about this teal range. So for this range, you typically want to go here. Just off the top of my head, I can think of two quick examples. Let's say you want to go forward a bit to get a flashbang onto an enemy Reinhardt. That's cool. You'll probably have to go more. You'll probably have to go maybe closer to the 5 or 4 meter range to do that. Maybe Pharah's like almost dead. You need to go forward just a little bit more. That's totally cool. McCree functions a little bit differently though than like the other characters we've been kind of talking about. He's more fluid in the sense that he can go like between these spaces much more more loosely. That being said, his space is more confined, right? Like McCree doesn't want to be getting like too far out of the edges of the fight. He wants to stay in this general like 10 to 30 space, right? And go forward and backwards depending on flankers, depending on who's in front of him, etc., etc. So let's talk about one last thing about McCree. I generally like to categorize flankers or characters in terms of how well they can flank, like how deep. Genji and Tracer, super deep. They're hard flankers. They can get way back in there. Then you have softer flankers like Soldier. And I would categorize McCree as a soft flanker, like Soldier, but definitely like a tier below, or maybe 2 tiers below Soldier, because he doesn't have sprint, doesn't have heal. His ultimate is far more static and less mobile. It's far more static and less mobile than Soldier's, right? So McCree, I do like McCree's to flank every so often, but very rarely. In general, you kind of want to just stick with your team. Poke out here and there for like Pharah's to help with flankers, diving, flankers and divers to help your backline, etc., etc. Okay, cool. I hope this video was helpful. If you'd like me to do a spacing video on a hero that you like, let me know and I'll see if I can do that. So post that in the comments below. And if you like the video, please subscribe. Thank you.